Welcome to the MHABC podcast. Today's guest is Gord Rattray. Gord became the executive director of the Manufactured Housing Association of BC in June of 2011. He has extensive experience working with nonprofit association management for over 25 years. He's a professional forester by training and is a graduate of the BC Institute of Technology with subsequent training at Simon Fraser University, the University of BC, and Edinburgh Business School. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome back to the MHABC podcast. Today we have Gord Rattray, Executive Director of the Manufactured Housing Association of BC. Good morning, Gord.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to be talking about the different types of factory-built housing. And Gord's just going to run us through the different types and give us some information and some insight into the difference between manufactured and modular.
Thanks, Caitlin. I really look forward to doing this because partly in doing these podcasts is to circulate and provide information that I do almost on a daily basis, because part of my job in the MHABC is to answer questions from the general public, from lawyers, bankers. And what I've come along over my 10 years of working for the MHABC now is I've come up with something I call FactoryBuilt Housing 101. And what I do in that is to walk through the types of homes that we construct within this industry in order to explain to these individuals of how they differ, the legal side of them, the certification side, those sorts of things. So I'm gonna start off, and I'll try and cover as much information as I can in my little overview, and I anticipate there'll be some questions after.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So typically I'll get a call and people will say, I've got a home and I don't know anything about it, or I'm thinking about buying a factory-built home. And so I go walk them through this process. And within our industry, there's three key types of processes that we use: Z240MH, A277, and Z241 Park Model. And my goal is to walk through these three types, give some information with the goal of having people walk away and make better purchasing decisions, and also to help our retailers explain it better. So I'll start off with Z241MH, and Z240 was initiated back in around 1972. And Z240 is really a standalone building code. If you see the standard, it's about 100 pages. And it explains everything from the type of frame, and these are Z240 has to be built on a steel frame. So that standalone building code talks about the welding standards on the steel frame to the vents on the roof. And what these types of homes, and again on a steel frame, they really are intended for manufactured home park community placement, or people that may have a piece of private property that they want to put a home on in that steel frame because integral in anchoring it onto the ground. Within the standard itself, there is a requirement these homes be subject to third-party inspection. And so when a company wants to start building Z240 homes, they'll come into one of three major inspection agencies in British Columbia, whether it's Intertech or QAI, Quality Assurance Institute, or what I call CSA inspections. And the company, one of those companies will come in, it'll inspect the plants, it'll certify it for that type of construction. The plant then carries on, and then that plant is subject to third-party inspection on an ongoing basis. So the customer is assured that there's a group that's overseeing the plant. And so that, in terms of the inspection itself, the inspection agent comes in. Initially, it's on a very frequent basis. It could be as frequent as once a month. And once they're comfortable that all the quality requirements, the certification standards are being achieved, then they can actually drop their inspection agencies down to once every 3 months. So that's Z240. In summary, standalone building code built on a steel frame, targeted for construction placement in a manufactured home or on private land. There is no size limitations. Generally today, Z240s range anywhere from 14 up to 20 wide in British Columbia, and they can be out to 76 feet long.
Wow.
The second one is what's called A277. The A27 standard is what's called a plant standard. really, when that same, and it's a very similar process to what's been done with Z240MH. One of those three organizations comes in, they certify the plant to build it to that standard, and really their questions are such that, does your company have people that are familiar with the BC Building Code? Do they know how to apply it? Are they familiar with all the energy efficiency standards that are now integral within the BC Building Code? And hence they move on, and then that company starts to build these homes. They'll come back, the company will come back and do a third-party inspection on it, and then what they will do with A277, and similar to Z240, once that company is comfortable that the plant is operating properly, they will provide stamps or seals, and they're placed within the home. Today they're placed right around the electrical panel, and it just says, I Intertech can ensure compliance against Z240MH, A277, and I'll talk about the Z241 in a minute. So the customer is assured that someone else has looked at it. Those homes are once they're constructed, different from the Z240MH is modular homes are really designed for placement on a perimeter foundation. Where Z240 uses that steel frame for anchoring purposes, A277 is really called a modular standard, and it's usually built using an engineered floor system. They're moved to site on what's called a float. They're craned onto a perimeter or full foundation, although there are some different methods that can be done for anchoring these types of homes, but they really are intended to compete directly with stick-built homes.
Okay.
So that is the A277 standard. The Z241 park model is a bit of a different animal, where Z240MH and A277 are termed full-time occupancy homes. A Z241 park model is not a full-time occupancy home. The standard clearly explains that these are seasonal type homes. They're not referenced in the BC Building Code, where Z240MH or A277 are. And it's not intended for people to purchase one of these and live in them full time. They really are akin to a travel trailer, a fifth wheel home, for example. But there are jurisdictions in British Columbia, more in the lower mainland, for example, where the seasonal conditions aren't as extreme. So there are some jurisdictions that have some bylaws that will allow permanent occupancy, but at the same time, they also have some specific requirements around how those homes are constructed.
Yeah, with the park models, do they have to have routine, checkups and things like that if you are taking it as a permanent residence?
No, there's not. No, they are treated the same for inspection purposes, QAI, Intertech, CSA inspection. So they are subject to third-party inspections. The bylaws will dictate if they are permissible for full-time occupancy, then the bylaws will dictate types of furnaces and sort of
bylaw.
thing.
Gotcha.
But the big difference is insulation. A Z241 park model doesn't have the same insulation requirements as a Z240 or an A277. And again, I just want to emphasize that they are intended for seasonal occupancy, really more of a cabin.
Right, so summer home
Exactly.
or recreational property.
Yes, and so that's where we've encouraged our retailers to make sure that when people come in that they're looking at options of one of the three, that the retailer clearly understands what is the intent. Or is it for a seasonal home that may be placed on a lake,
right?
Or is it something where people are planning to live in it full time? Then the options become Z240MH or A277. So those are the three standards, and that's really a summary of what I call FactoryBuilt Housing 101. A few other things that are really important for the customer to know, that within British Columbia, we have what's called the Manufactured Home Registry. This is unique to British Columbia. It's being looked at other provinces, but it was started back around 1978, and it was really brought in order to protect the banks. So whenever one of those types of homes, the A277 and Z240, because park models are not building code compliant, they're not captured by the MHRs. So anyone that's purchasing a Z240MH or an A277 will find that when they purchase that home, it's got a manufactured home registry number that's dictated by BC Statistics with the MHR in Victoria. Today, it's a 6-digit number with a little provincial crest, and that crest is placed directly on the home. And that is intended that for protection purposes, for ownership purposes, when that home receives that MHR number, it's moved onto the site. There's a relocate permit that's issued by the province, and once it's on site, it can't be moved unless there's another relocate permit applied for. So it's really intended that the province knows where those going, and potentially anyone that may have a mortgage on it or from mortgage insurance, they know that home is going to remain there in place. Mm-hmm. Another important part of the MHR number is if you are to get mortgage insurance, for example, CMHC will say we can treat a manufactured home, modular home. The only way that you can do it as a separate entity is a chattel, what's called a chattel mortgage. And so if, for example, CMHC, if you wanted to link a home with a piece of private property mm-hmm. for mortgage purposes, then what you would call you deregister that home. And in that regard, then the home theoretically can't move again once it's deregistered. The home and the land become one entity. So it's important for customers and retailers to explain the importance of how this is unique to British Columbia and why the MHR number is important and how it will remain for the entirety of the home and only becomes mute if you are to deregister, but it still carries that 5 or 6 digit number for its entire lifetime.
So even if you, like you said, you deregister it, if you want to go and sell that home, then can you sell it and have the next owner then register it?
That's exactly, because that's when that home is sold, the MHR number stays with that home, and right. then the notary public or the legal firm will register that number with the MHR in Victoria. So they will explain that it's been a transfer of home ownership.
Yeah, okay.
That number remains with it.
I see, yeah.
Another thing I'd like to cover off is warranties, because mm-hmm. it's important to understand that factory-built housing is treated a little bit differently within British Columbia. If you, back in, again, around 1978, when there was a problems in British Columbia with a leaky condo situation, the BC government brought in BC Housing, and within that, they required building certification standards. They required a mandatory, what's called a 2-5-10 warranty, and it's really two years of everything, 5 years water penetration, and 10 years structural. So if you were to purchase a home and it has a 2-5-10 warranty on it, then everything's covered for 2 years. If there's problems with construction or there may be some water penetration, they're covered. And then 2 years if there was a wall deformation or something, then that's covered off within that warranty.
Is that specific to the factory-built housing industry, or is that any house?
It's a little bit different, because what they did when they brought in BC Housing is because it goes back to my comments around the third-party inspection. The government mm-hmm. at the time said, well, because these homes are subject to inspection in the plans, they don't need real oversight by the government. So there was an exemption for factory-built housing from the BC Housing 2-5-10 certified builder requirements. Okay. But today, the majority of homes in British Columbia that are covered under by factory-built housing, it's mandatory for MHABC members that they provide a minimum of a 1 in 10 warranty. And that warranty is covered within the purchase price. The way that warranties work, it's covered off by a third-party insurance company. So it's separate from the retailer, it's separate from the manufacturer. Those warranties are purchased, and then they exist with the home for the warranty period. So again, whether you're 2-5-10 or 1 in 10 warranty, it's 10 years warranty on those homes. Mm-hmm. Critically important for purchasers whenever they're negotiating is to ask those important questions about warranty. Mm-hmm. There are some companies that are not strictly, they're not members of the MHABC, and they may only provide a one year conditional warranty. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk to people, I automatically say, make sure that you understand what those warranty
Right.
requirements are.
Yeah, you want to be protected by that.
Absolutely. So it's
Yeah.
really an important topic that needs to be addressed when you're looking at purchasing a home. One of the things that's important is to understand that factory-built housing is treated the same for assessment purposes as well. So if you're purchasing a home and it's placed on a site, it's treated the same as whether you're talking about a stick-built home or a factory-built home, is that they're assessed the same, and it's important for the homeowner to understand that. You know, they're going to be saying the same level of taxes because those homes are treated exactly the same.
Right.
So it's an important thing that you want to be able to understand when you purchase a home, how the government looks at them. Z240 has a specific anchoring standard. It's called Z240 10.1. It's another CSA standard that dictates how that home is to be anchored to the ground.
So like foundation or
Exactly,
Yeah.
and it's within the CSA standard that is treated as a permanent foundation. It's anchored. It's got skirting around it, but
Right.
for mortgage purposes, and I often get questions from the finance agencies, the mortgage brokers. What about this foundation standard? And I'm able to say that's a CSA standard.
Yeah.
It meets all the seismic and wind conditions, and so it's another thing that to understand because Z240MH really utilizes that steel frame as important anchoring, where A277 again is intended to be placed generally on a perimeter or a full basement foundation.
So if a home is structured on a full basement foundation, those cannot be moved.
Once like an A277 modular home is intended, it's no different than if you're a site build a home or stick build a home. It's
Right.
the home is transported onto the site. It's generally 3 to 4 modules now where they're craned onto the foundation. They're bolted down, and then, for example, a carport or a garage would be built on front of it. We can't build
Right.
carports in a plant. They just aren't structurally sufficient. So those are built on site. So it's important to understand the foundation side of when you're purchasing home. The majority of our retailers with the MHABC are what I call turnkey operators. So you'll go in as a purchaser. You'll determine what type of home, what are your property situations, and then it would be up to the retailer to help you determine whether a foundation should be built. In many cases, they have contractors or their own internal staff that are able to construct these sorts of foundations, and then they'll take care of the placement on the home and those sorts of things. Another important thing is to understand that within local government jurisdiction is that you're still required to get a building permit.
Right.
So
for the whole home and anything additionally.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, what happens is for factory-built housing, which is different from site-built, is that home has already been inspected by the plants, and because it's got that compliance sticker on it, a building official anywhere in British Columbia would say, okay, because the foundation is built on site, then there will have to be a building permit. Obviously, they have to take care of the drainage and water hookups and that sort of thing. They don't inspect the home because that's already been done.
Just what's there.
That's right. So when that building permit is required, they'll clearly explain that it's going to be an A277 module. It's 3 pieces. It's coming from one of the manufacturers. It's already been certified. It's A277, for example. And the building official can say, okay, that's fine. I don't need to do any more. I know it's been done, but I'm going to come out and do ongoing inspections on that foundation, for example, or any of the site hookups, those sorts of things.
With the foundations and building basements, that sort of thing, are those something that the members do, or is it up to the customer to find somebody to build those for them?
That's reference back to my statement on turnkey operations. Generally, it's in the best interests of a customer to be able to say, well, look, I'll go to a retailer and I want to build a 1,800 square foot A277 home, and I want to put it on a full foundation. And have that retailer undertake the whole program because they're familiar with it. There are situations with people that will come along and say, look, I want to build my own foundation. They'll deal with the building permit where former comments is the retailer would go and apply for that building or permit. They would be familiar with the local government people. They can move it expeditiously. They're more familiar, and generally the building officials are more confident that they've got people that know what they're doing, rather than someone that's going to say, I just want to construct the foundation.
Yeah.
They may become the general contractor, but our experience is such that turnkey operations are usually more efficient and cost effective.
Right, of course. And so then if they were to go with somebody, a general contractor for the foundation or the basement, would then there be two separate warranties that they'd have to look at as well? It wouldn't be all under the retailer at that point.
Again, very good question. So because there's a warranty that comes with the home from the factory itself that was part of the sales agreement, that has its own warranty. Depending on who does the work on the foundation would be responsible for any damage.
Yeah.
So if there was a retailer or even an independent contractor, if the home was constructed, there's problems with the foundations, and we experienced very, very few types of problems like this. But there would be whoever was responsible for the foundation construction and the building permit requirements. They would be responsible for any remediation. There wouldn't be anything that would be addressed by the manufacturer, by the plant, for example.
Right. And what if I do want to move my home? And you said that there's certain homes that can and cannot be moved, and so the ones that can be moved, what's the normal procedure look like for that? Yeah.
So generally what we're talking about on those sorts of is a Z240 MH, and you've got a manufactured home park, and you're going to move to another local government, another jurisdiction, another town or city. What you'd have to do is, because in order to move most of these homes now, when you're 14 and 16 and 20-foot wide homes, is there's a Ministry of Transportation infrastructure permits that's required in order to do that. It's very strict. Most of the moves
put it on your own truck and
you don't move these on your homes. In fact, that's an interesting point, because when Z240 MH originally came out, it had its own wheels and axles because they were generally 10 and 12 feet wide.
So they were able to just move on their own.
Weren't very heavy, so they could be built on their own. Today, because the size of the homes now, when you're talking a 16-foot wide, 5 meter, 72 feet long, they're way too heavy, so they're used on, they're moved on heavy-duty equipment.
Right.
So back to your question. So when you're going to move that 1672 that you've got in Chilliwack, for example, and you've decided that you're going to move to Merritt,
right.
What you'd have to do is you'd have to engage a transporting company that has expertise in doing it.
Right.
What they would do then is they would go to the manufactured home registry. They would ask for what's called a relocate permit. Once they've got approval that the MHR knows that it's going to move from Chilliwack to Merritt, for example, then that same company would then go to the provincial permit center, which is run out of Dawson Creek, and they would apply for a permit, and then there would be stipulations that the government lay down that, depending on the size, when it can be moved. Most of the moves are done in the middle of the night now to avoid traffic problems.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the Coquihalla during rush hour.
No, you don't. And then it would be even the requirements within MTI. They've got actually a specific transportation policy manual, and there's lots of components with it that address manufactured housing that talk about how many pilot cars you have to have, when you can move it, those sorts of things.
Time of year must be.
In many cases, there are the majority of the highways in British Columbia don't have seasonal restrictions on them, for example. But there are, for example, when we move homes with BC Ferries, there's seasonal restrictions where you may have a home and you have to move it in the wintertime when the tourism traffic's lower.
Yeah, right. So BC Ferries offers transportation for modular.
They actually have had to tighten up over the last few years, where previously that we would be able to move a 16-foot, 5-meter wide home on BC Ferries. They have now restricted it down to about 14 feet. Very strict timing on it. So most of the larger homes, like a 16-foot, 5-meter wide, would go on C-span barge, for example,
so
which
would
come out of Vancouver,
company.
because they're the only ones with the vehicles capable of doing it. And BC Ferries, as if they're just the way that they're really subject to the boat, the specific boats,
especially
the tides.
going to certain islands, perhaps if it's a smaller ferry.
So if you were to purchase a home and you're going to take it on to Vancouver Island, it's probably in most cases, if you're purchasing a 16-foot, 5-meter. I'm using interchangeably, but they would go on a barge rather than on BC ferries today.
Right.
One of the things, Caitlin, I'd like to cover off is when I get calls from the general public, I usually start off and say, okay, how old is the home, for example? Where are you planning on moving it to? Generally, we may run into problems if it's an older Z240. As I say, Z240 came in around 1972. And typically one of the problems that I get the calls on is somebody has a 1978 manufactured homes and they can't find those stickers. And the contracts are specific to say that the only thing that denotes that as a Z240 is the stickers that are placed on the homes. Back in that era in 72, the stickers were placed near the front main entrance and generally in the kitchen cabinets. So automatically what happens is somebody's built a deck, they've taken the siding off, takes it to the dump. They then replace their cabinets, the cabinet stickers are lost. And we go through many, many problems, and this is a typical question I get, and I have to walk the people through sort of the protocol here. So my question is, how old is it? It's older. It's newer than a 72. Okay, then it's a Z240. Let's start trying to figure out if we could find those stickers. Maybe there's a reference in the, it may have been sold a few times, and there's reference to the standard. There may be a specifications plate that's on the home. So I have to walk these people. But one of the key statements that I say to people, where are you going to take it to? Mm-hmm. Please phone up the local government jurisdictions and ask if there's any bylaw restrictions on factory-built housing within the community you're going to move it to. We're making more and more progress, but we still have a situation where some jurisdictions, the bylaws may be out of date, and they have very specific stipulations on where these homes can be placed. Mm-hmm. And so once I get through sort of how old is it, let's see if we can confirm what the standard was. And then the first thing I say, okay, now let's make a call I'm going to move it to Merit. Let's phone up Merit and ask the bylaws people what their bylaws provisions are and the movement of that home into that local government jurisdiction. So it's really important because I say to people, you don't want to get it there and then have the local government or local building officials say, sorry, it's restricted by our bylaws.
You got to do a bit of research there ahead of time.
Another thing that's becoming a little bit more prevalent today, there are some jurisdictions in British Columbia that will say, look, we accept Z240 MHs and A277s, but we don't want anything that's older than a 1992, for example.
Right.
1992 was a fairly pivotal area. And when the code, the standards were substantially updated, they moved from, aluminum windows, metal roofs to vinyl windows, Duroid roofs, for example. And so some of the jurisdictions in British Columbia are saying that's the kind of home we want. Mm-hmm. We don't want to see some of these older homes that were constructed in an era when energy efficiency wasn't as critical. Fuel costs were much cheaper. Mm-hmm. But what they're saying now is we're more than willing to we want these types of homes, but we want to make sure we've got the newer ones. There's just because the energy efficiency required and what they're trying to achieve in their local communities, it's important to make that call and just make sure you understand what those bylaw restrictions may be in that community you're thinking about having that home placed. And
also, moving a home that old, was it also dangerous to transport a home that age in any way? That's
we start talking back to sort of our coverage on wheels and axles. If it's a smaller home, the first thing that we'll say to people is get under it and have a look at the status of those homes. I say to people, climb on. Probably the most important one is to get under it. Make sure you understand what the condition of those wheels and axles. Mm-hmm. But as important is to look at the ceiling, the insulating bag and that sort of thing. That the status of those homes, because that's where you could run on moisture problems or rodent problems. So I'll say to people, if you're thinking about purchasing an older home, same thing.
That
get
could be
under
a whole
it,
other
get a building,
conversation, I'm
get
sure.
an inspector to have a look at it so
Yeah.
you know what you're buying.
Yeah.
I could report on many horror stories
I'm
of people
sure.
that have phoned me that were
Yeah.
looking at an older home and ran into some significant problems. Nothing wrong with them, although I have to say that a home that was built in 1972 was never intended to comply with the building code. It was really more. I shouldn't say a shorter lifespan on these things, but clearly they were,
permanent? Yeah,
aluminum
or-
windows and that, and minimal insulation. Where today, if you were to look at a Z240MH versus an A277, there's no material difference. Z240MH today is almost fully in compliant with the BC Building Code. There's some minor difference on some door and window standards, but that's a completely different home
Right.
than you'd be looking at if you
Yeah.
were considering purchasing something back in the in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. And I know that the history of factory built housing is on the website, and it's quite interesting to see how far it's come and how modern and different they are now. They've come a long way.
That's one of the,
Yeah.
in terms of our information campaign within the Manufactured Housing Association of BC, is really to explain those differences.
Yeah.
It's interesting today with the demand for housing that manufactured housing is really sought after product now. But I always have to caution people that if they're going to look at a much older one, make sure you do the due diligence
Right.
and have inspections. Whether you do your own sort of surveillance, look at, get under and have a look, but more importantly, get an inspection company to come in and look at it that knows what they're doing and can give you a proper assessment on that home.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything else that we want to cover today, Gord? Is there?
No, I think we've covered most of it,
Yeah.
Caitlin. These are the sorts of
great
questions I'm
information.
really pleased to be able to
Yeah.
do this, because this is typically, I probably get 4 or 5 calls a month from people at Z240.
Yeah.
What's the difference if I'm looking at a Z240 on a steel frame versus an A277? What about this park model situation?
Right. Yeah.
They're really important. It's really important to have because, again, today's factory-built housing is akin to a site or stick-built
That's
home.
right.
They're same quality. There's obviously some different conditions where we have to be able to move these homes. So there's, we're especially in southern British Columbia, we're impeded by overpasses and narrow highways and that sort of thing. So there always will be a difference between, site-built and factory-built housing. But in terms of the quality themselves, there really are no difference today.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thanks again, Gord, for joining us today.
Pleased to be here.
For more information, you can go to the MHABC website at mhabc.com. Stay tuned for more from MHABC.